Growing up in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, as a kid, all I had to do was walk out my back door and I was in the woods. My first exposures to the natural world came through traditional stories shared by my father, Joseph Bruchac, with myself and my brother Jesse. Within Abenaki tradition, there's a long history of dogs. Hearing those traditional stories, especially those about animals, really got me excited about getting out in the woods and exploring with one of my dogs. Of course, dogs are very good trackers, so often my dog would discover the signs of an animal way before I would. In fact, my dogs are often such good trackers that I had to hold them back a little bit so that they didn't destroy some of the footprints I might be trying to find. When in the woods with my father, he would of course point out many things, whether it be the various plants and trees, an animal track, or even how to build a survival shelter. And many kids nowadays are amazed how much time I spent in the woods when I was as young as 6, 7 years old. And I think one of the reasons why I was never scared was usually I had one of my dogs with me. They were constantly aware. They would investigate any sound, any smell. And if by the odd chance I ever got lost, they always knew their way home. Dogs show up in quite a few of my dad's books, whether it be the trilogy of Dawnland about a character known as Young Hunter and his dogs and the various adventures they have in BC America, or whether it be the book Dog People, which is a collection of different native stories about humans and their dog companions. All of that, of course, is linked to that native tradition of having dogs. They were, in many cases, the only domesticated animal in most of North America. In many different native traditions, dreams are very respected. And I still recall the night before we came home from a vacation when I was about 12, 13 years old, and I had a dream. And in that dream, one of my dogs came to me and she was licking me all over the face and she was so happy to see me. But when I woke up in the morning, I was filled with a strange sadness. And it was later that day that I found out that dog had actually died while I was away. And that connection, I believe, can run that deep. In my teenage years, once I was able to drive, I was able to have even more adventures with my dogs. One time with my Labrador, Tina, we decided to climb nearby Buck Mountain. And Tina was having such a good time. She was just running all over the place, wearing herself out. Well, about halfway up the mountain, I ended up having to carry her because she could no longer walk. She just worn herself into the ground. Luckily, by the time we got to the top, gave her some more water, she was fully refreshed, rejuvenated, and we had a great trip down. Of course, building on my various adventures in the wilderness, I eventually began to share these skills in my late teen years, whether it be tracking animals, how to survive in the woods. I enjoyed sharing with all ages. One of the coolest things when I first started teaching was the fact that I was running these classes on the very land where I first learned many of these skills. My last dog is named Montana, and Montana was a rescue dog. He had had a hard life, and I adopted him when he was about 2 years old. Over time, I was able to train him a bit, and our bond grew very strong. And we had a lot of fun together, spent a lot of time in the family woods, went on long car trips together, and he just became a great companion. The reason I gave him that name was because at that point in my life, I was spending a lot of time out west, especially with my colleague, Dr. James Halfpenny. During my trips out west, I, of course, got a chance to track many of those animals I had heard stories about, whether it be a mountain lion, wolves, or grizzly bears. There was always plenty to explore. When I first started teaching at the Education Center, Montana was quite a bit a part of that. But when we dealt with animal tracking, it could be somewhat of a problem because I hate to admit it, but Montana was a much better tracker than I am. Sometimes we would actually bring a mountain lion over for people to be able to see this animal in person. And we would have this cat go through the woods and leave tracks so that the people could follow it. And the funny thing is, hours later, I would let my dog out, Montana, and he would get right on that trail and he would just follow everywhere that mountain lion went, even if it was 4, 5, 6 hours later. One year he got into a porcupine and we had to spend a little more time than I wanted to at the vet getting these porcupine quills pulled out of his face. Well, a week later, we were jogging in the woods and getting near dark, couldn't quite see, and Montana just took off down this trail. And I'm like, oh no, it's another porcupine. It was right, pretty close to that same area. So I'm running after him, and he's right up in front of something, and I could see it's all puffed up. I'm like, oh, it's another porcupine. Well, just as I grab him by the collar, I look down, and about 2 foot from our faces was not a porcupine, but a skunk doing a handstand. And I pulled him away as quickly as I could, and to this day, I don't know how we didn't get sprayed. When I first got engaged to my wife, Lisa, she wasn't very comfortable living next to the woods. She had grown up a little bit closer to an urban setting. Of course, when possible, Lisa joins me on many of my adventures, but often with my travels, she finds herself at home. She was always comforted by Montana. Montana would make her feel safe at night when I wasn't there. And when she would go for walks in the woods, she would bring Montana. And there were several occasions where she kind of lost her way, kind of like I had done when I was a young kid in these woods. And Montana would help her find her way home. Now, of course, on the way, he might get into some mud, he might check out some other things he wanted to get into, but he would always help her find her way. And she grew quite attached to Montana. About 2 weeks after returning from our honeymoon in Australia, Montana woke up one morning and he couldn't use his rear legs. Now, here was a dog that was 14 years old, just full of life, and all of a sudden he couldn't walk. And Lisa and I spent a whole weekend going from vet to vet, trying to figure out what was wrong with Montana. It turned out to be neurological. And it was a tough decision, but we had to put Montana to sleep. So a friend of mine who's a vet arranged to come out to my house to put Montana down on the property that he loves so much. When the vet came over, we laid him out on the front lawn and put him to sleep, and Lisa and I both comforted him as he slowly went into that long sleep. And after he died, we buried him along the trail that we still take to this day to go into the woods. In Mayan tradition, it's believed that when your time comes, when it's time to go to the next life, you have to cross over an abyss, a huge ravine. And there's a log that lays across this ravine that you have to cross over to get to the other side. And they say that on either side of that log are all the dogs that you ever owned. And whether or not those dogs hold on to that log tightly enough depends on how you treated those dogs during their lives. And I believe, I'm truly confident that when my time comes, my dogs won't give an inch. When I first met Nolka, I felt an instant bond. From our first walk in the woods, I knew right away we were going to have some great adventures. So many things that I look forward to doing. We're going to have a great time. Dog is truly man's best friend.